Welcome to Auburn Community Television. In this episode of Meet the Artist. Meet the Artist is supported by the North Auburn Artists to introduce artists in our local community. Today, our guest is a member of the North Auburn Artists. Her name is Marianne DeMartini, and she works with clay and creates the most beautiful ceramics. I am so pleased that she has invited us into her studio so that we can learn how she works with clay and see some of the most fabulous work that she does. Let's go see Marianne. We are now in Marianne's studio, and it is such a fabulous place to visit. You can walk into this studio and you can see her work with clay from the very beginning stages all the way through the finished product. What's the most amazing part of the studio is getting to actually watch her work on the wheel, which she's going to do with us today. Marianne, thank you so very much for having us today.
Oh, LouCinda, you're welcome. Thanks for coming by. I'm so excited.
Well, let's start with just some background information about you. And I guess the beginning is, where did you start?
I started probably when I was 4 or 5 years old playing in the mud. And I just really liked to squish that dirt with a few drops of water and make something out of it, little animals or so. And I just always liked that tactile experience. And clay smelled so good too. To me, at least it does. So then I eventually did go to an art school, which was based upon the Bauhaus program. So I did a basic education in wood and metal and painting, and then eventually came to clay and worked with ceramics.
So you can say is that actually it captured your true joy then.
It did capture my true joy. I started out with industrial design and found that all very interesting too, but clay just really drew me in. And just the way you can work it in so many incredible ways, really, and decorate it and color, make your own glazes. So it's a never-ending experience, really. It's really an adventure for me.
I think a lot of us, when we think about the ceramic work, we see the finished product.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there is a process using the wheel and the clay. But we really don't understand all of the steps that go from that starting point to the end product.
Sure.
And one of the things that surprised me the most was the glazing process, which I know we're going to talk about today as we talk about the stages. Because it isn't just something, let's throw it on the wheel, put it in the kiln, out it comes, and da-da.
Some days that would be nice. Those frustrating days when things don't go quite right. But yeah, it is a long drawn out process really, because clay, to be serviceable, to be useful, if you use the wheel or if you use your hands and sculpt, you still need to bring it to a form that's useful, and so it has to be fired. And there are many different ways of firing it. You can do gas or electric, or you can do wood firing, salt firing. There are so many raku different ways, but the goal is always to take the soft clay or the leather hard clay to a stage where you can really use it.
Now, also with this process, this isn't just, I'm going to sit at the wheel today and just see what comes out of it. There's planning ahead of time.
Sure.
In terms of shape. Do you also plan out your overall design before you even start on putting it on the wheel?
Yes, in general I do. I have a sketchbook, and also when you're an artist or a person who likes art in any form, you are often overwhelmed with impressions through your daily life, just things that catch your fancy, things that catch your attention. You see some leaves a certain way, you see clouds in the sky or something, and so you would like to capture that in the next work you do. So then it's a good idea to sketch it down somehow, to catch it, and then think about it. So with clay, for instance, if I want to do a design like on this flat bowl, which right now it's just painted on the inside with underglaze, and that will have a design, and the outside will have one. I have to think a little bit about if I don't do a design that's not geometrical. So here I have to think about, how I go about it to have at least a rough layout.
So now we have this in front of you, and obviously this is not the beginning stage. This is after it's been worked on the wheel.
Right.
From your pure ball of clay.
Right.
And so what's happened after that? You've shaped it, and then what have you done here?
I shaped it, and then the next day when it's leather hard, that's what we call it, it's sort of like cheese, the feeling, then I trim it. So I trim a foot and the inside so that it sits nice and straight. And also I do this little area here, so when I glaze it, the glaze doesn't run onto the shelf where I fire it. So, and then after I trimmed it, just sort of refining the shape a little bit, I painted it with the underglaze. And then I have little tools. This is this Graffito tool, just like a bent piece of metal. And then I drew these lines to get started on these. And then I will fill in the design here all the way to the top.
Now, is that just scratching away the underglaze then? Is that what you're doing here?
That's what it is. So it's really going like this.
All right, let's turn that around so we can see for the camera. She's just done more of these here. Now, have you already worked out this design in a drawing someplace?
I did in the very beginning, but I've made several in the same style. And so each piece is always different. I never do it exactly the same. So I sort of know where I'm going. And so now I don't sketch this one out. It's sort of in my head. And I just follow that. And there are sometimes little mishaps or things that happen where it doesn't pan out quite right, where it comes together. So if I see that coming, I think about it and then I alter it a little bit to make it fit again.
Now when you, like this looks like such a perfect circle around here. Is this done on the wheel as well? Or
Yes, the trimming is also done on the wheel. Yeah.
And is that done after it's this leather consistency as well?
Leather hard.
Yes. Oh, interesting.
So you can still work it. It's not too hard. Once it becomes dry, really dry, like chalk, let's say, you can't really work it. And you don't want to, because you don't want to breathe in the clay dust that would be released if you would work with it.
Now, when we initially walked in, you had this all covered in plastic.
Yes.
Is that so that you do kind of maintain that a little bit of moisture in it?
Yeah, the cheesy quality. So I can still work with it, yeah.
And I noticed that you have a bowl of water here and a brush. Is that to add moisture or is that to wipe away residue? That's
actually to wipe away. So as I work, I go like this sometimes to get the little pieces off so I can see the design clearly again. And the water is actually not so much for this piece at this stage. I don't add water here. It's more when I do carvings on the edges and smooth them out after I carve them.
You know, and looking at this, I've just like, you live in circles.
I guess that's true.
Everything is circular. Interesting.
Yeah, I like the wheel. There are many clay artists who work with slabs. They build from slabs. They like rectangles. They like irregular forms. And to me, the process on the wheel just really appeals. And I like the shapes I get from there and to work with. So yeah, I do like circles.
Do you find that when you're looking in nature that you are kind of more drawn to things that are more circular then?
I know that I always like church windows, like those rose windows. And in nature, I mean, circles, lakes, you don't really, sometimes on butterflies you find these circles, right? But it's just such a, it has a beginning and an end, and then it keeps going and going. And so it's an interesting shape to fill.
Oh, I think it's wonderful. And like I said, it was just funny because I see circle. So
yeah, probably quite a few.
You're going to give us a demonstration on the wheel.
Sure.
Which is, we're going to start out with a ball of clay. And out of that ball of clay will rise something absolutely perfect and beautiful.
It's not going to be perfect. Nothing here is perfect.
Oh, well, from an amateur, or I'm not even an amateur in this area, as a non-artist in this area, it's perfect from my viewpoint.
Well, thanks.
So let's go ahead and move over to the wheel.
Okay.
And we can talk about that process.
All right.
Marianne, so now you're at the wheel and you're going to give us this demonstration. What are you going to be making?
Well, I have my white clay, which is a mix of 50% porcelain and 50% stoneware, and it's very nice and smooth. And the bowl you saw before, where I did some graffito work on, was thrown with this clay. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to throw a bowl. So I put my piece of clay onto my wheel and start centering it, because every circle starts with a good center. So first I cone it up, that's what that's called, because if you have a smaller surface, it's easier to keep it still in the center. But because I want to make a bowl and not some big witchy hat, I'm going to push it down again.
Now, how do you regulate the speed of the wheel?
I have my foot on a foot pedal, so here it can go from very slow all the way to fast. And when I start to center, it's at its fastest speed. Okay, and now I'll slow it down just a little bit and open it up to start making the floor of the bowl as well as the walls.
So when you're doing this, this is not only the speed of the wheel, it's also the pressure that you're applying with your hands.
Right, that's really it. It's sort of a play between my hands and the speed and the water and the clay. All four together have to work. So right now I'm smoothing the bottom on the inside and I'm opening it up a little bit more. And now I'll slow it down just a little more. And this clay is really very soft, maybe a little bit too soft almost, but we'll see how it works out.
As you're doing this, I'm still thinking back to where you said you started by playing with mud as a child.
Yeah.
And I can kind of see that, but I can tell you, I played with mud and I did not go this direction.
Yeah.
This is just wonderful. There's a part of me that wants to just get involved and do this.
It's a lot of fun. It's just a very nice feeling on your hands. And you have this tension of making something out of this malleable clay with the water. So now I'm at a point where I will start pulling for the wall. Let's slow it down a little bit more. And somewhere there is an air bubble. And when I have an air bubble, I take my little tool and I poke it so I don't have to.
Now, did you visually see the bubble or did you feel it?
I feel it. I feel it in my under my fingers. And if you have an air bubble, that's not a good thing here because it would make the wall wobble eventually. At this point, I also start using a sponge to help with the friction, because it's getting a little bit bigger than for my fingers. But with the sponge, I can release some water and I can keep the friction down if I work it together. So now I'm pulling up the wall bit by bit. And when you throw with clay, one thing that I remember from art school, and that's just really important, is you put your hands on slowly and you take them away slowly afterwards, because everything you do with your hands influences how the vessel will look. So if I take my hands away quickly, it's really easy to give it a knock and then it's out of center again. Okay. So now I'm going to thin the wall a little bit more and give it a little more direction to be lower.
So if you wanted to put a lip or something on this, you would just use, again, would you come on the outer side to kind of make it go over? Or, I mean, it just seems like you could do just about anything in shaping here.
You can do a lot, but it's also really fragile right now.
Oh, okay.
So if I would try to turn it over, let's say, it would probably collapse.
I see.
Yeah, so it's at a very fragile, soft state right now. Because I added water during the throwing, right now I'm taking a little bit of water away. So what I do, I check for thickness and evenness. And now I'm going to use these little metal kidneys, is what I call them, first to clean up a little bit. And I take all the loose clay away. The slip is what we call it, on the outside. So it becomes drier and a little straighter. And then I take this kidney, which is shaped differently, and work on the inside. And that's how I will lower the bowl and widen it a bit more. So you can see from the profile on the outside what happens on the inside. And I do that with several courses, let's say, because you cannot do it too quickly.
So you're actually removing clay from it.
I am removing some clay, which I will use later again. And now you can see how it goes lower. And
I notice the speed of it is a lot slower now than when you were initially doing it.
yes, if I would speed it up now, it would lose control of itself, so to speak, and it would really probably flop down because of the gravity and the speed. So speed is very important, really. So this looks pretty good at this point, and I found another air bubble, which I'll take care of. So I can try to make this bowl go a little bit lower, but probably not a lot. So we'll see. This would be the last time I would.
Now at this stage, if something were to happen and it did flop over or just lost its shape, it could still be put back into the ball and
Yes.
started all over.
Yes, I would have to wedge it again. So I would take it and probably push it together and put it on a plaster bed so it loses some of its moisture, and then later I would wedge it again. I wedge all my clay. I get it in 25-pound bags from 2 different places in Sacramento, and when I get it, I wedge it afterwards. I slam wedge, which means I pick up half of it and slam it down on the other half. And I do that often enough to get all the air bubbles out and to have a nice consistency that's the same all the way through. So now I'm saying this bowl is done, and I cut it off the bottom. So, and then later, probably tomorrow morning, when it's leather hard, again that cheesy consistency, I will trim it by cleaning up the inside a little bit, although that's normally pretty clean already, but I will trim the foot, and then I can see what kind of design I want to put on it. So to cut it off the bat of the wheel, I take my cutting wire and very carefully pull all the way through, and there we go. here it is. Yeah, and this is a nice thin one. So on this one I might either do the underglaze treatment, or I might start carving the top rim and do some other work with it. So
Now, from this point, is this when you start going through, so it's this leather, you dry it, you set it aside till it becomes the leathery consistency?
yes, it has to be a bit drier.
All right, so now it's still attached to part of the wheel.
This is a bat, so that's
okay.
a separate thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it sits on these little nubbins on the wheel head, so I can more easily take it off. Because when I learned in Germany in college, these didn't exist then at the time. So what we did, we either threw on the wheel head and took it off and put it on a wear board. But with an open bowl, that's harder than with a closed shape, because if I take this off, it will start wobbling. And so then we would have plaster bats, which we would attach with a little bit of slip to the wheel head, and we threw on that. I actually have some behind me there in the shelf. And but then these came along, and they are wonderful to use. So it's an improvement.
So do you keep it on this for how long?
I keep it on there for, in the summer, probably for 4 to 5 hours, unless I cover it with plastic, to time better when I can come back and trim it and get it off. But 4 to 5 hours in the summer, and then I would start trimming it by putting it actually with a shape like this. I would put another bat on top and then flip it like a sandwich, so I can trim the bottom.
Much like what we were working with before when we saw it upside down,
yes.
and working along the edges
Yes.
of it.
Yeah.
So now when you do a piece, do you pretty much just focus on that piece from beginning to end? So you take a break of 4 to 5 days and don't do anything? Or do you have pieces that are in various stages of creation?
I have pieces in various stages, yes. And what I do, I normally work in small groups. So I might throw 3 or 4 of these and maybe 2 smaller pieces, let's say. And then I let those dry, and that's enough for me to work on with more detailed decorating. And then when they are sitting there to dry, in the meantime, I might bisque fire some other pieces, or I might work on my glazes, because there's always another step in the process that I have to think about and work ahead. I have to fill my kiln, so I have to get things ready, clean the bottoms for the bisque firing, or I have to start glazing and thinking about which glazes I will use on which pieces. And then glazing is a pretty long, drawn-out process, so I do those things in between. So there's always something to do to push the process along.
At what point does it go into the kiln? You mentioned something about a bisque. I don't understand what that means.
The bisque is the first firing, and that's to, some people single fire, but most ceramic artists, potters, fire 2 times. The first is the bisque firing, where you are trying to get your piece to a stable consistency, so it's hard, and you can then glaze it and put it in the glaze firing. So it's 2 pieces. And the bisque firing goes up to cone 06, roughly. So it's not as hot as a glaze firing. And the time when you put it into that is when all the water has left the piece that you can detect. So it feels really dry to you. There is still crystalline water in there and moisture, but during the bisque firing you do it really slowly. You burn that out. It leaves the clay body eventually. So to test if a piece is dry enough, I often take it and hold it against my cheek, because if it's cool there is still water in there, and so it has to dry a little bit longer.
So at what point is the piece at its most fragile?
Just before the bisque firing, really, because it has lost the cheesy quality again. I love that cheesy clay, where it's still actually a little sturdier. But the more it dries, it just becomes very fragile, yeah.
Now, all of these steps that you go through, what's your favorite?
I like the throwing and the decorating and thinking about design pieces. I like that whole creating it and then working on it until it looks like what I want it to be. I'm not too excited about the glazing part. That's just a little more difficult for me. I mean, I do it and that's fine, but it doesn't have that immediacy. It takes a long time to prepare the glazes, to put them on, to do it very cleanly and just how it needs to be done, and then put it into the kiln, which again is a drawn out process because it has to also be very clean in there so no glaze runs or sticks to anything, because it's a liquid glass, so have to take care with that. And so that's and then the firing takes a long time. So I like the throwing and the forming and shaping and
obviously the finished
yeah.
product.
And I like the finished product. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's let you get cleaned up, cover
All right.
that like you need to,
Sure.
and we can move on to actually look at some of your pieces.
Okay.
We're now in front of the wall or shelves that will show the progression of the work from the time it went from the wheel until the point that I guess it's going to the kiln.
It's going to the kiln, yeah.
So why don't you share with us?
Yeah, thank you. This is a wall piece which is thrown and it's drying now. So this has not been fired yet, but I have done my graffito on it, and you can see it's a piece that can hang because it has those keyholes. I also did a little design on the inside, and then it can, once it's fired and glazed, it can hang on the wall. So I like to do different designs on there. It's a really nice way to do creative different ideas.
Before you put that down, you used a word that I don't know if you've used before or we've defined it before. Graffito.
Graffito, yeah. Graffito really means scratching. That's where the word comes from. And it means on my white clay, I put this dark underglaze on, so it's just solid in color. And then I take this tool and scratch out all these lines. And that's called graffito.
And that's what you were demonstrating before?
Yes.
Okay.
It's the same technique, yeah. So this is this wall piece. And these other pieces here, these are all waiting to be fired. So this is my red clay. It's called Navajo Wheel. It comes from Sacramento. And like I said before, to really find out if it's dry enough to go into the first firing, you just hold it to your cheek. And these are dry enough. They're not cold anymore. So these are little vases. They're pretty fragile right now. I could break it off if I wanted to. Not a good idea.
Now this is a different type of clay than you were throwing earlier.
Yes. It's a stoneware clay that goes up to cone 8. That's when it's vitrified. And I like this clay because it gives me different colors when it's done. So this one here, the white clay with the porcelain in it, will be a pale blue with white on it eventually. And the red clay, for instance, in this vase, this is the red clay, the Navajo Wheel. I also did graffito on, but with a dark underglaze, and I scratched the lines out. And so this will be a very different look eventually when it's glazed. It will actually look a lot like this vase. This vase is the same clay, but it's been fired 2 times with a glaze on it. And so this is sort of the finish. One can see them.
Now when you put the glaze on, because there's a big difference between this point and the one that you showed, is that because is the glaze a different color that you put over it that changes those colors?
Yes. So the glaze, this glaze is a white glaze on the outside. It's cloudy white, I call it, because it's sort of an off-white. And it fills in the lines that I had scratched out with this graffito with this whitish glaze. And then the underglaze, the dark one, shows up in a more mottled, darker color in between. And that's how I get the contrast here. Yeah.
Now, I'm going to pull up, these are with the same process.
Yes.
And are these using then a different glaze?
Yes, this is also the red clay again, but this is a different underglaze. This is actually the same underglaze as I used for the wall piece, but on a red clay. And here it becomes navy blue gray with this transparent glaze over it. And the lines I scratched out become another shape of gray actually. So depending on the glaze and the technique I use, they can look very different.
Yeah, they really do. Now, as we move along, I can see you've still got some here that are ready to go into the kiln.
Those are not fired yet.
So all of these
All
have
of
not
these
been fired.
There was all of these have not been fired yet. So this is a plate I did that has to be fired for the first time. And again, it's this darker design. And then down below are pieces that have been fired one time already. So that's why I can just grab it like this and it doesn't break off, which I couldn't do with the others. So the color changes a bit. It becomes a little lighter as the bisque firing happens. And also you can hear it has a little bit of a ring already, not quite like when it's finished, but that will need to be glazed. So this is a finished, and this has a more bell-like ring to it. So that's higher fired then. Yeah, so all these pieces need to be glazed now, the ones on this shelf, and fired for the second time.
Well, let's move from here over to the most fabulous part of your studio that I like.
Thank you.
Because I do like the finished product.
Right.
This is all fascinating, but I love the finished product. So let's go over and take a look at some of the pieces.
Sounds good.
So when we came over to look at all of the fabulous finished product that Marianne has, we came upon the kilns. So I wanted to stop briefly so we can talk about the kiln, because this is a crucial element to getting from the clay to the finished product. So Marianne, talk to us about the kiln.
Thanks. Yeah, so this is my smaller kiln. I have two. I have another one like this, a larger oval one. It's an electric kiln. I work with electricity here. I do an oxidation firing. Gas firings are great to get a different kind of glaze, but in my situation where my studio is, the electric kiln works really well for me. So I'll open it up so you can see how this works. This is a top loading kiln. You might have seen this before. So it's built out of this space age material that they invented with the space developments, and it has electric coils in it. And so I will load it up by putting things, let's say, into it, and then like with furniture, I'll put some posts in there and then some shelves, and so I can load it up all the way to the top, and then close it again and fire it for the first firing, normally overnight, and take it out then the next day. And for the glaze firing, I fire for longer, and that goes up to about 2300 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's pretty hot. But yeah.
And how long does it stay then in the kiln?
It also stays in there. I fire it in the morning, come to a cone where it's supposed to be, and then I take it out the next morning. So it takes a while. Yeah.
All right, so we will have some few pictures of this because it's obviously impossible to shoot down. It is quite deep, and I can understand how you're basically building the shelves as you're stacking in.
Yeah.
Because obviously you want to get as much in here with each firing that you can.
I do try to be economical and pack it tightly, which is also better for the temperature development, the firework, the heat work in there if you have more, so that's a good thing.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure.
Marianne, I'm so pleased now that you're going to show the finished product. As I've often said over and over as we've been filming today, is that this is actually my favorite part, because this is part of the shopping for me.
Right.
So why don't you explain the pieces that you have that are here in your studio for people to actually see, and the different processes possibly as you compare them as you're going through.
Right. So this vase here is one of the Graffito ones that's finished now. So you can see that the darker underglaze became with the whitish glaze on top, sort of a paler medium blue. And the lines are all smoothly covered now by the glaze, so you can put it in your hands. It feels really nice, and it's all finished. You can put flowers in there. It holds water. Here is another Graffito design where I did what I call like a basket design. I like the meditative aspect of making all those small marks, and it reminds me of basketry.
Now, I'm going to back up a little bit here. You indicated that the one could hold water.
Yes.
Now, are these dishwasher safe?
They can be put in a dishwasher, although I don't recommend it because dishwashers are so abrasive, really, over time. They are perfectly fine. The glazes are stoneware glazes, but I would rather hand wash them.
But they can be at least hand washed.
Oh, yes. Oh, you can scrub them with a brush. Yeah.
Okay.
This is another design on my white clay, and this is a lace bowl. So I threw a bowl like you saw earlier on the wheel, and then when it was leather hard, I carved out the top and made all these openings and cleaned them up, and eventually I glazed it with this what I call midnight blue glaze, and it feels very smooth. It's nice for fruit or for vegetables. They get some air circulation, so I really like this design.
To be honest, this is one of my favorite designs that you do, and I'm just fascinated by it, that it has such intricacy to it. And you're right, it does look like lace.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, so here is another design of this Graffito, just to see another design with the vertical lines and then the triangular design. This is really nice also for a bigger bunch of flowers or grasses. Something else I've done this year are my river rocks. So these are actually paperweight shapes, which I've made for many years, but this time I added a different design, and this is how they hang on the wall. So very easily, just on a screw. And the nice thing is that one can arrange them in different formations. So I really like that idea. This, some dust in there. This is my aqua glaze, so it's a different shade from the others. And here I did what I call my Lotus design. That's how I cut the edge, and it gives it a bit of a feeling of a flower. And then the aqua glaze in there, depending how thickly I apply it, it can get these veil-like colors in it, depending how thick it is. On the outside also, that's a bit thicker. And it's just a really lovely, smooth glaze. I like the blue and greenish shapes.
And then go on, and so you have, it looks like now you're going into a darker, almost glazing as you're moving across.
Yes, there are some other glazes. So like up here, this is actually a green glaze, and it got a little bit hotter than I thought it would be, and it turned almost a little bit gray in the green. A nice color for fall also.
Now, I noticed that you have some that are two-color. So along the lip you have a darker color, and then you have, that is entirely done with the glazing process?
No, this is actually my white clay, and then I take a part of it and I make it a blue clay by adding cobalt oxide. So I wedge cobalt oxide into the clay, then I put those two little balls together and put them a couple times together and throw the shape on my wheel, and that's how I get these striations in the shape. And after trimming it and firing it, I glaze the inside and the band around it. So that's a swirly clay.
On up above you, there's also another one that has kind of your teal with the blue down below. Is that one done entirely with the glaze, or is it the same process you were talking about?
This is done with two glazes with overlap. So I have white clay, I glazed it with the aqua on the inside, and then I did this shape with the aqua, and then I came with the dark blue to get the overlap, and that's how I get different tones with those two glazes.
I love the fact that the colors of these can vary from, you can do that from various points through the process
Yes.
by the type of clay you're using,
Right.
as well as then when you get into the clay glazing.
Right. So it's not just the glaze itself that really affects the color, but it's really the color of the clay underneath that lets you work with it, depending on how transparent your glaze is also. So this piece, for instance, is a white clay again, but it has this really dark brown glaze, which is a semi-matte, which I like. It feels really satiny also. And here you don't see any of the glaze color, of the clay color coming through because it's so dark. But with the red clay and the green glaze here, you can see there is graffito underneath, but you can see a bit of the clay coming through and throwing some shadows there.
Now on this piece that you're holding, it looks like you've actually added something to the vase for the, what's the flowers?
These little
the
flowers,
florets?
Yeah, I did. After I trimmed and cut the lip on top, and I pushed it in a little bit, and then I added those, and then I did the carving down here. So it's sort of a forest vase.
You have such a variety of styles, both in the terms of the shape and the various things that you can make with the clay, but also then the finished look.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask you again, do you have a favorite?
Oh, that's a difficult question. My favorites change, I would think. I really do like this graffito, so I'm somewhat partial to that. For instance, I really like this piece. But because of the contrast, and it has a certain character that I like. But that's hard for me to answer. It changes by the season, I think. I really do like, though, this color combination. I do like this because it reminds me of the beach sand and the line where the water hits the sand and a little bit of foam on there. So I really do like this combo.
Well, I love the fact that you have used so much with the blues, because I have to say that's probably my favorite color.
Oh, good.
Well, thank you so much for showing all of this work to us. And
Sure.
I'm going to join you here, and
All right.
we can talk a little bit more about you and what you're doing. I understand that you have work that's at the Persimmon Art Gallery.
Yes, I do.
And where is that located?
It's on Lincoln Way, and I don't know the house number right now, but it's right between Awful Annie's on the right, and on the left is Joe Caribbe's.
So that would be on the east side of Interstate 80.
Yes.
So as you're heading out of Auburn up to the Tahoe area, you can get off, have a meal at Awful Annie's,
Right.
and then stop in at Persimmon Art Gallery.
Yeah.
How many artists are there?
We have about 16, 17 there. It's quite a bit, and it's a beautiful gallery. It's very light and airy and has a really nice array of colorful art.
So in addition to that gallery, if someone was interested in purchasing some of your pieces, how else can they get in contact with you in order to do that?
Well, I do have a website, and I have a shop on Etsy, a little storefront that I've had for 12 years now. And so they can go to my website, which is Marianne DeMartini, MarianneDeMartiniCeramics.com. And the other option is, though, also to go to the North Auburn Artists website, which is NorthAuburnArtists.com, because I'm one of the members, like you. And they can find a profile on me there, and also all the events that we have planned for the year. So another option is the Plaza Artist Studios Tour for 2021. This is this. Yes, that's the Studios Tour, which will be in November, and the dates are November 12th, 13th, and 14th from 10 to 5 p.m. each day. So you have 3 days to get around and see quite a few of the studios. And there is a wide array of artists to be seen.
In fact, this particular tour is held the second weekend in November every year. So if you miss it this year, you can come around and do it again next year. What's great about the show as well is that this year it is actually being run by the Placer Art artists. So we have 122 artists that are going to be participating. In addition, as Mariana indicated, that she is a member of the North Auburn Artists. And this group also has a regular annual Mother's Day tour, which is obviously on Mother's Day every year. So coming up for the next year, you can be watching for that and be able to come to Mariana's studio, because most certainly this location is very, very interesting because she has everything here so you can see the process from the beginning to the end. And Mariana, will you be demonstrating at any of these?
Yeah. I'll answer any questions people have, and I'll be demonstrating at the wheel. Yes.
So you get the same opportunity in person that we've gotten today. Mariana, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And I also want to thank you for tuning in to Auburn Community Television by either watching us on YouTube or tuning in to Wave on Channel 20. Who knows, by watching this show or going around to any one of the tours, you will discover that you have an artist living just around the corner, or just possibly you'll discover the artist within.